They were outnumbered, outarmed, and outmatched. Just 313 men stood against a well-equipped army of 1,000. To any outsider, it looked like a suicide mission, a hopeless standoff in the blistering heat of the Arabian desert. But what unfolded that day would shake the foundation of a region and rewrite the story of one of history's most unlikely victories. This is not just a tale of strategy or swordsmanship. It is the story of unbreakable faith, divine intervention, and the unyielding determination of a community that had lost everything, yet chose to rise. The year was 624 CE. In the small but growing city of Medina, a fledgling Muslim community, barely 2 years removed from exile, was learning how to stand on its own. They had come from Mecca with nothing but their faith. Their homes had been confiscated, their businesses seized, and their belongings looted. Among them was their leader, the Prophet Muhammad, once mocked, now respected, but still tested at every turn. The Quraysh of Mecca, powerful merchants and tribal elites, viewed him as a threat, not only to their religion, but to their dominance in the region. And so they plotted, they threatened, and now they were preparing to fight. As tensions escalated over trade routes and past grievances, the Prophet made a calculated decision to intercept a caravan carrying Meccan wealth, much of it belonging to the very Muslims who had been forced to flee. But destiny had something far greater in store. What began as a caravan raid would become the Battle of Badr, a clash that would echo through centuries as the moment when 313 faithful men defied the impossible. Abu Sufyan's caravan snaked its way through the vast and unforgiving desert, its camels laden with goods, spices, and gold coins, wealth amassed through trade and, more crucially, through the seizure of property left behind by the Muslims who had fled Mecca. This was no ordinary caravan. It symbolized Meccan pride and power, a commercial lifeline stretching from Syria to the heart of the Quraysh economy. But as it neared the outskirts of Medina, a growing sense of unease crept into Abu Sufyan's heart. He knew the Muslims were aware of this route, and he feared they would strike. For Abu Sufyan, this wasn't just about protecting merchandise. It was about reputation, honor, and preventing what would be seen as an embarrassing defeat. The Prophet Muhammad and his companions were not known for senseless violence. Their plan to intercept the caravan wasn't born out of greed, but out of justice. The belongings now being transported across the sands had once filled their homes in Mecca. Items forcefully taken when they were driven from their city, with nothing but the clothes on their backs. To the Muslims, this was not a raid. It was reclamation, a chance to restore what had been wrongfully stolen. Realizing the gravity of the threat, Abu Sufyan acted swiftly. He diverted his caravan from the main trade route and sent an urgent messenger galloping toward Mecca. That rider reached the city in a state of theatrical desperation, his camel mutilated, his garments torn, his cries echoing through the streets. It was a calculated display meant to incite panic and urgency, and it worked. Mecca was stirred into a frenzy. This was not just about a caravan anymore. It became a matter of tribal dignity and vengeance. Warriors rallied. Horses were prepared. Weapons were polished under the scorching sun. They would march with 1,000 strong to protect their pride, their wealth, and their dominance. But what none of them foresaw was that the caravan, the very reason for this mobilization, would eventually escape safely. And yet the Quraysh, now intoxicated with rage and arrogance, chose to proceed. They weren't just coming to defend, they were coming to destroy the Prophet and his followers, once and for all. As the dust trailed behind Abu Sufyan's fleeing caravan, a lone rider thundered across the desert, carrying with him a message soaked in desperation. Sent by Abu Sufyan himself, this rider raced to Mecca with one objective: raise an army. His arrival at the holy city was nothing short of theatrical. Riding a wounded camel with its ears and nose cut, his clothes torn, and his voice raw from shouting, the messenger stormed into the heart of Mecca. The people gathered quickly, drawn by the urgency in his cries. It was a method known to all, a visual alarm system that meant something catastrophic was unfolding. He told them the Muslims were on the move. that Muhammad and his followers had left Medina with the intention of intercepting the caravan. The danger was imminent, the threat real. This wasn't just a raid on merchandise, it was an attack on their collective pride. The Quraysh, already boiling with resentment over Muhammad's growing influence, didn't need much convincing. Anger flared, and swords were drawn from their sheaths in anticipation. Among those present was Abu Jahl, one of the Prophet's fiercest enemies. When he heard that the Muslim force numbered only 313, he laughed in contempt. "Only 313? He scoffed. "We'll march with 1,000. He asked how many horses the Muslims had. "2, came the reply. Abu Jahl sneered and declared, "Then we'll bring 100. When told the Muslims had about 70 camels, he vowed to take hundreds more. For every weakness he heard, he answered with arrogance. To him, this wasn't just an act of defense. It was an opportunity to crush Muhammad once and for all. Even after receiving word that the caravan had safely escaped the threat, Abu Jahl refused to turn back. The logic of the situation no longer mattered. This had become a matter of pride, of tribal superiority. Abu Jahl had decided war was inevitable. They would meet the Muslims at Badr, not to protect wealth, but to extinguish a rising movement they could no longer control. As the Quraysh army marched with full strength and confidence, the Muslim contingent, vastly smaller and poorly equipped, moved with quiet resolve. Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, led this group not with the fire of vengeance, but with the clarity of purpose. Every step was calculated, every decision weighed with wisdom and consultation. The Muslims had no illusions about the odds stacked against them. They were 313 men, many of them without armor, with only 2 horses and about 70 camels between them. Yet they walked forward, not because they believed in numbers, but because they believed in something far greater, divine justice and a cause worth defending. When they reached the area of Badr, a region known for its wells and strategic positioning, the Prophet initially chose a spot for the Muslim army to camp. But one of his companions, Al-Hubab ibn al-Mundhir, respectfully asked whether this position had been chosen by divine command or by human judgment. When the Prophet replied that it was a decision made through consultation, Al-Hubab suggested a different location, closer to the main water wells and further from the Quraysh. He explained that if they camped near the wells and secured control over them, they could deprive the enemy of water and force them into exhaustion before the battle even began. The Prophet, always open to counsel and deeply respectful of wisdom, accepted the suggestion without hesitation. The army moved to the new location that very night. This decision would prove critical. Controlling the wells of Badr allowed the Muslims to dictate the terms of the battle. It gave them not only physical advantage, but psychological strength. They built a small shelter for the Prophet, where he could observe the battlefield and pray. From this shelter, he spent the night in earnest supplication, asking Allah for victory, for protection, and for the future of his fledgling community. He also organized the ranks with intention and care. The front lines were made up of the most seasoned warriors, including those who had pledged their lives to him in Mecca and during the migration. He rotated soldiers to keep the energy steady, aligning them not by seniority or class, but by readiness and strength of heart. With every detail attended to, the Prophet did not promise victory to his companions, but he promised meaning. Win or lose, they were standing for truth, and that alone made them stronger than any army. The dawn of battle at Badr broke with a heavy stillness, a quiet tension that hung in the air between the two armies. The Meccans, confident in their numbers and armor, stood in formation, convinced that their sheer force would crush the Muslims within moments. But the Muslims, though fewer, stood united, anchored by a shared belief and an unwavering trust in their Prophet's leadership. The ground between them, soon to be soaked in sweat and blood, became the setting for one of the most legendary openings in Islamic history, the Challenge of the Champions. From the ranks of the Quraysh emerged three warriors: Utbah ibn Rabi'ah, a prominent elder of Mecca, his brother Shayba, and Utbah's son Walid. Clad in full armor and radiating confidence, they called out to the Muslims, demanding that equals meet them in single combat. It was a traditional way to begin a battle among the Arabs, a duel to establish dominance and shake the enemy's morale. From the Muslim side, three Ansar, supporters from Medina, stepped forward to accept the challenge. But the Meccan champions sneered at them. "Who are you?" they barked. "We don't want you. Send us our own blood, those who have betrayed their fathers and forefathers." The Prophet, recognizing their demand and the opportunity to show the strength of his most loyal men, summoned three of his closest and most courageous followers. Hamza ibn Abdul Muttalib, the lion-hearted uncle of the Prophet; Ali ibn Abi Talib, the young and fearless cousin of the Prophet, only 24 years old; and Ubaidah ibn al-Harith, a noble warrior from the Prophet's clan. The three Muslims stepped forward with purpose, their swords gleaming under the rising sun. What followed was swift and fierce. Hamza met Shayba and struck him down with ease. Ali clashed with Walid and overpowered him with speed and precision. The duel between Ubaidah and Utbah was more brutal and evenly matched. Both men landed heavy blows, and Ubaidah suffered a deep wound to his leg, but Hamza and Ali rushed to his aid, finishing Utbah and carrying their injured brother back to the Muslim lines. Though Ubaidah would later succumb to his wounds, his sacrifice marked the first of many noble acts that day. These initial duels sent shockwaves through the Meccan ranks. Their champions had fallen, their pride bruised, and their morale shaken. The Muslims, though outnumbered, had made their first stand with honor and strength. The desert winds carried the tension into the silence that followed, as the rest of the battle loomed just beyond the horizon. With their champions fallen and the honor of their finest men lying in the sand, the Quraysh army was rattled. The echo of steel and the cries of the dying still lingered as the full weight of battle approached. On one side, 1,000 men brimming with confidence, adorned in armor and assured by sheer numbers. On the other side, 313 believers, most of them lacking proper weapons or armor, yet carrying something far heavier, a mission they believed had divine backing. As the sun climbed over the barren terrain of Badr, a quiet standoff began to stir into chaos. The Prophet Muhammad, standing among his men, had instructed them with clarity. "Do not move from your position. Hold your ground." The strategy was not to meet force with reckless bravery, but with disciplined resolve. The Muslims formed solid ranks, tightly packed and anchored by unwavering faith. They were not aggressive, but neither were they afraid. Their plan was to hold the line, absorb the first wave, and let the enemy's arrogance work against them. It was a psychological game, and the Quraysh, swollen with pride, fell right into it. Abu Jahl, fuming from the humiliation of the lost duel and the Prophet's calm resistance, ordered a full assault. He believed it would be a quick and decisive clash, a storm of swords, a few fallen rebels, and then a triumphant return to Mecca. But as the Quraysh surged forward, they found not a fleeing band of outcasts, but a wall of unshakable resolve. The Muslims absorbed the first wave, their lines holding firm. Their limited numbers were masked by clever tactics, rotating fighters to the front lines, refreshing the defense, creating the illusion of greater strength. Confusion spread among the Meccan ranks. They were supposed to overpower, not be resisted. As dust rose and the sun beat down, the Quraysh tried again. Abu Jahl screamed for another attack, thinking pressure would break the smaller force. But the same result followed. Muslim ranks remained intact, unwavering. Quraysh warriors began falling, 5 for every 1 Muslim, and still the Muslims did not retreat. Their psychological advantage deepened with every moment. The more the Quraysh pushed, the more they faltered. Amid the chaos, something shifted. The battle was no longer about numbers or weapons. It became a test of belief, of resolve. of whose hearts were truly ready to endure, and it was becoming clear that faith was proving mightier than any sword. As the afternoon heat pressed down upon the sands of Badr, the tension reached a boiling point. The Quraysh, frustrated and fatigued, had already made multiple failed attempts to shatter the Muslim lines. Their pride was wounded, their rhythm broken. The enemy that was supposed to collapse under pressure had not only withstood the onslaught, but had begun to shake their confidence. Still, Abu Jahl refused to retreat. His fury had blinded him to strategy. His mind was fixed on one goal: crush Muhammad and end this rising movement once and for all. He ordered one final, full-force assault. The Quraysh ranks reorganized, rallied their men, and surged toward the Muslim lines with everything they had. Dust clouds rose into the air as the ground trembled with the sound of hooves and the clash of weapons. But this time, something was different. The Muslims did not merely hold their position, they responded. As the Meccans advanced, the Muslims launched a coordinated counterattack, charging forward with precision and force. It was not chaos. It was purposeful, controlled, measured. The defenders had become the aggressors. What the Quraysh had failed to anticipate was the spiritual conviction that drove each Muslim fighter. They weren't fighting for land or wealth. They were fighting for truth, for faith, for the promise of a better world, and it showed. Their movements were sharp, their unity flawless. The Prophet himself had raised his hands in earnest prayer that morning, seeking divine assistance. And now it felt as though the heavens had answered. In the thick of the battle, the tide turned. Quraysh fighters began to falter. Some fled in confusion, others dropped their weapons. The weight of their numbers became a burden rather than a strength, as the battlefield turned against them. In the chaos, the Muslim warriors found clarity and momentum. It was during this wave that Abu Jahl was struck down, a moment that symbolized more than just the fall of a commander. It marked the collapse of the Quraysh's confidence and the breaking of their will. The retreat was swift and disorganized. What had begun as a confident march turned into a scattered flight. Meccans ran in all directions, desperate to escape the wrath of a force they had grossly underestimated. The 313th had done the unthinkable. They had not only survived, they had triumphed. The battle was over, and history had been made. The dust of Badr had barely settled when word began to reach Mecca. Survivors from the Quraysh army stumbled back into the city, exhausted, wounded, and broken, not just in body, but in spirit. The reaction in Mecca was disbelief. At first, many refused to accept what they were hearing. How could their mighty warriors, their seasoned generals, their lavishly equipped army be defeated by a mere handful of men? It seemed impossible, almost insulting. But the stories were consistent. Abu Jahl was dead. Utbah and his kin were gone. Many of the Quraysh elite lay lifeless in the sands of Badr. What was meant to be a swift punishment had turned into the greatest humiliation the Quraysh had ever known. For over 60 years, the Quraysh had ruled the region with pride. They had never faced such a loss. The city that had once basked in the glory of defeating armies now trembled in the shadow of defeat at the hands of men they had once exiled. The tribal elders gathered, desperate to make sense of what had happened. Their economic lifeline had been threatened, their prestige shattered, and the man they had tried to silence, Muhammad, now stood taller than ever. Some began to whisper that perhaps this movement was not as weak as they had believed. Perhaps there was something greater behind it. Meanwhile, in Medina, the atmosphere was electric. The returning Muslim army was welcomed as heroes. Joy spread through the streets. Families wept with relief. Children ran beside their fathers. People gathered to embrace their returning brothers. The Battle of Badr became a symbol of hope, of validation. The Muslims had not only defended their rights, they had done so with honor, against impossible odds. Yet amid the joy, a quiet sorrow rested in the heart of the Prophet. As he entered his home, the Prophet Muhammad learned that his beloved daughter, Ruqayya, had passed away while he was away on the battlefield. She had been ill, and though he had carried the weight of the entire community into battle, he had also carried the silent burden of knowing his child was slipping away. But he did not let his grief shadow the joy of the people. He kept it within, allowing the community to celebrate the victory that had lifted their spirits and reshaped their future. In both cities, Mecca and Medina, the world had changed. The defeated no longer ruled through fear, and the once persecuted now stood in the light of triumph. Badr was not merely a battle. It was the moment the world realized that the Muslims were no longer a scattered group of believers. They were a force with a destiny. The Battle of Badr would forever mark a turning point in the history of Islam. What took place in that desert valley was more than a military victory. It was a spiritual awakening, a validation of faith, and a dramatic shift in the balance of power across the Arabian Peninsula. In the days and weeks that followed, word of the battle spread far beyond Mecca and Medina. Tribes that had once looked upon the Muslims with skepticism or disdain now began to reconsider. If 313 could defeat 1,000, what kind of strength did these believers truly possess? For some, the answer pointed not to numbers or weapons, but to the unseen force that guided them. Their unshakable belief in one God and their trust in Muhammad as his messenger. The prophet did not let the victory breed arrogance. He knew what lay ahead. The Quraysh would not rest. Their pride had been wounded, their losses severe, and their fury only deepened by the realization that their enemy was no longer weak. Even as Medina celebrated, whispers of revenge brewed in Mecca. Abu Sufyan, who had escaped the earlier threat to his caravan, now took charge of Quraysh preparations. He vowed to avenge the humiliation of Badr by raising a far greater army, one that would number in the thousands and strike at the heart of Medina with merciless intent. Within the Muslim community, Badr instilled a renewed sense of purpose. It was proof that truth could stand against tyranny, that oppression would not last forever, but it also reminded them of the cost of resistance. Men had died, families had mourned, and the prophet had lost a daughter he loved dearly. Victory had come with sacrifice, and no one forgot that. In the eyes of history, Badr became more than an early Islamic battle. It became a symbol of divine support and prophetic leadership. It was a moment when the odds meant nothing, and the cause meant everything. Yet with every victory comes consequence, and with every rise, opposition. The Quraysh would return, more determined than ever. The battle lines of faith and resistance were only beginning to be drawn. The next chapter, though unwritten, promised even greater trials. What happened at Badr was not merely a clash of swords or a confrontation between two armies. It was a battle of belief, of perseverance, of unwavering trust in a higher purpose. On that scorching battlefield, 313 souls faced a force more than 3 times their size, not with fear, but with conviction. They stood for justice, for truth, and for the right to worship freely after years of humiliation, exile, and loss. Their victory was not just in the defeat of an army. It was in the triumph of principle over pride, unity over division, and faith over brute force. The legacy of Badr continues to inspire millions to this day. It reminds us that true strength does not lie in numbers or might, but in sincerity, patience, and courage in the face of overwhelming odds. It shows what can happen when leadership is wise, decisions are rooted in justice, and people are bound together by a shared mission greater than themselves. The victory was not theirs alone. It was a victory for all who believe that right can overcome wrong, no matter how impossible it may seem. If this story moved you, if it sparked something deeper within you, don't let it end here. Share it. Let others hear the story of how the seemingly impossible became reality on the plains of Badr. Leave a comment with your thoughts, and let's keep the memory of these brave souls alive. And if you want to learn what happened next, how the Quraysh responded, and what battles followed, make sure to subscribe and stay with us as we uncover the next chapter of this epic journey.